What if the most important warning about the future of American naval power did not come from a U.S. admiral, but from a statesman thousands of miles away who spent his life studying how great powers rise, stretch, and sometimes falter? Kuan once argued that the defining challenge for dominant nations is not winning decisive battles, but surviving transitions. Transitions in technology, in economic balance, in geography, and in global power distribution. If you apply his strategic lens to the current moment, a clear and unsettling picture emerges. The U.S. Navy is approaching its next high-stakes test. Not a single dramatic clash, not one headline-grabbing confrontation, but a layered systemic test of endurance, deterrence credibility, industrial resilience, alliance cohesion, and technological adaptation, all unfolding at the same time. Think about what that means. The U.S. Navy is not preparing for one crisis. It is preparing for simultaneity, and simultaneity is the most difficult condition for any military force to manage. Kuan predicted decades ago that China would rise steadily and methodically, that the United States would remain powerful but increasingly stretched, and that the Indo-Pacific would become the central arena of 21st century competition. Those three forces are now converging, and at the center of that convergence sits the U.S. Navy. Maritime power is not just about ships, it is about flexibility. Naval forces can project air power without foreign basing rights. They can deter without occupying territory. They can move without permanently escalating. Nearly 90% of global trade moves by sea. Energy flows through narrow maritime choke points. Semiconductor supply chains depend on secure shipping routes. Grain exports cross oceans before reaching markets. If sea lanes are disrupted, markets react within hours. Insurance rates spike. Energy prices surge. Supply chains tighten. The Navy is not merely a warfighting institution, it is a structural stabilizer of the global economy, and that is exactly why its next test is so consequential. The Indo-Pacific is no longer a peripheral theater, it is the center of gravity. The distances are immense, logistics are complex, the sea lanes are crowded with commercial traffic. The Taiwan Strait and surrounding waters represent one of the most strategically sensitive maritime corridors on Earth. The South China Sea connects global trade networks. The Strait of Malacca funnels enormous volumes of shipping between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Kuan understood the importance of these waterways better than most leaders because Singapore sits at one of those crossroads. He believed that whoever shapes the Indo-Pacific shapes the century. Today, the U.S. Navy conducts patrols across these waters, reinforces alliances with regional partners, and maintains a steady operational presence. Aircraft carriers rotate through the region. Submarines operate quietly beneath contested waters. Destroyers and cruisers conduct freedom of navigation operations. Amphibious groups train with allies, but the environment is no longer uncontested. Naval expansion in the region has accelerated. New surface combatants, submarines, anti-ship missile systems, and layered surveillance networks complicate traditional assumptions about maritime dominance. The U.S. Navy retains unmatched experience and significant technological advantages, especially in nuclear propulsion and submarine warfare. But the operational margin in specific regional scenarios is narrowing. Kuan predicted that rising powers would not attempt to match American global presence ship for ship immediately. Instead, they would concentrate leverage regionally, shaping conditions within their immediate maritime sphere. That is precisely the context in which the next high-stakes test could unfold. It may not begin with dramatic escalation. It could start as incremental pressure, gray zone tactics, coercive signaling, and persistent probing. The challenge for the U.S. Navy would not simply be to respond, it would be to sustain credible deterrence over time. Aircraft carriers remain central to American naval power. They are floating air bases capable of generating sustained sorties. They symbolize political commitment and strategic reach. When a carrier strike group appears offshore, it communicates resolve without a formal declaration. But the maritime environment has evolved. Long-range anti-ship missiles extend engagement distances. Surveillance capabilities, satellite, airborne, cyber-enabled, reduce concealment. Hypersonic research compresses reaction windows. Carriers are still powerful, but they operate in a more complex threat environment. That demands adaptation, distributed maritime operations, greater integration with submarines, expanded use of unmanned systems, and tighter coordination with land-based air power. Transitions in doctrine are rarely smooth. Kuan believed that great powers are most vulnerable, not during obvious decline, but during structural adjustment. When systems evolve, friction increases. The next high-stakes test may occur during this period of transformation. If tension escalates in a contested maritime zone, decision-makers will face compressed timelines. Reaction speed, logistics coordination, and alliance synchronization will matter as much as firepower. The pressure is compounded by simultaneity. The Navy must reassure allies in Northeast Asia, maintain presence in Southeast Asia, support NATO commitments in the Atlantic, contribute to stability in the Middle East, and prepare for emerging Arctic dynamics. Each region asserts strategic importance. Each region requests presence. Yet ships are finite. Maintenance cycles are unavoidable. A carrier deployed in one theater cannot operate in another at the same time. Operational tempo accumulates strain on hulls, mechanical systems, and human crews. Maintenance backlogs grow when deployments extend. Training cycles compress when readiness demands intensify. This strain does not appear overnight. It accumulates quietly. Lee often emphasized that institutional stress begins invisibly. It appears as minor inefficiencies, deferred maintenance, extended deployments, compressed training schedules. Over time, those pressures compound. If a high-intensity contingency emerges during such a period, readiness margins matter enormously. The next high-stakes test will measure not only tactical skill, but structural resilience. The human dimension is equally critical. Ships are machines, navies are people. Extended deployments strain families. Recruitment faces demographic shifts. Retention becomes more difficult under sustained high operational tempo. Fatigue is not visible on satellite imagery, but it affects performance. Kuan consistently emphasized discipline, morale, and institutional cohesion as strategic variables. A navy's endurance depends on its people. If the operational environment remains tense for prolonged periods, maintaining human capital becomes central to sustaining deterrence credibility. Technology has altered the maritime domain profoundly. The ocean once provided concealment. Today, commercial satellites track movements. Open source analysts monitor fleet deployments. Drones extend surveillance reach. Information moves instantly. Transparency increases strategic pressure and reduces reaction time. In a fast-moving crisis, policymakers may have hours, not days, to reposition assets or signal intent. Lee warned that technological acceleration makes miscalculation more likely because decision windows shrink while public visibility increases. A Taiwan Strait contingency illustrates how layered the next high-stakes test could be. Such a crisis would not be confined to naval maneuvering. It would involve air operations, cyber disruptions, space-based vulnerabilities, economic sanctions, and global market reactions. Carrier strike groups would play a role, but so would submarines, missile defense networks, allied air forces, and industrial supply chains. The credibility of deterrence would be scrutinized intensely. If deterrence holds, stability persists. If credibility wavers, escalation risk grows. Industrial capacity forms another pillar of endurance. Warships take years to build. Submarines require specialized manufacturing. Advanced propulsion systems and electronics rely on complex supply chains. If a conflict damages vessels or expends munitions at high rates, surge capacity becomes critical. Kuan believed economic depth determines military staying power. Initial strength matters less than the ability to sustain production under stress. The Navy's next test could reveal whether industrial throughput aligns with strategic commitments. Alliances amplify strength but also require coordination. Japan, Australia, South Korea, the Philippines, and NATO members contribute to regional balance. Lee saw alliances as America's structural advantage, but alliances must function seamlessly under pressure. Intelligence sharing, command integration, logistical interoperability, and political alignment all become decisive in a crisis. The next high-stakes test may measure alliance cohesion as much as naval firepower. Economic interconnectedness magnifies stakes. Maritime disruption in the Indo-Pacific would reverberate globally. Energy prices would surge. Stock markets would react. Supply chains would contract. The Navy's mission in such a scenario would extend beyond combat. It would involve restoring confidence in maritime stability. Lee understood that in a globalized system, economic shockwaves can amplify strategic friction. That amplification raises the cost of miscalculation. At its core, Lee Kuan Yew's warning was about prioritization. Great powers cannot treat every region equally. Strategic clarity must guide resource allocation. If the Indo-Pacific is the central theater of competition, force structure and deployment patterns must reflect that reality. If commitments remain diffuse, concentration weakens. The next high-stakes test may force difficult decisions about where to deploy carriers, how to distribute submarines, and how much reliance to place on allied contributions. The U.S. Navy is adapting. Investments in unmanned systems, enhanced submarine fleets, long-range precision strike, integrated missile defense, and cyber resilience signal awareness of evolving threats. But adaptation must outpace external innovation. Transition periods are inherently risky. If confrontation occurs during adjustment, pressure intensifies. The oceans remain vast. The fleet remains formidable. Alliances remain robust. Yet the high-stakes test Lee Kuan Yew predicted is not about immediate defeat or dramatic collapse. It is about sustainability under cumulative pressure. Can the Navy maintain credible deterrence across immense distances while managing maintenance, personnel, and industrial constraints? Can it adapt doctrinally before technological shifts narrow margins further? Can it coordinate allies seamlessly in compressed decision environments? Can it sustain presence without eroding readiness? These questions define the next era of maritime power. The test is not scheduled. There is no public countdown. It will emerge through tension accumulation, technological acceleration, and geopolitical maneuvering. If deterrence holds, the test may pass quietly. If miscalculation occurs, consequences will be global. Kuan believed the survival of great powers depends on their ability to align ambition with capacity. The U.S. Navy remains central to global stability. Its strength is real, its reach is unparalleled, but endurance, not symbolism, will determine its long-term success. The next high-stakes test will measure whether structural resilience matches strategic responsibility, and in that measurement, the true state of maritime power in the 21st century will be revealed.